Did you know that September might actually be the best month to visit Iceland? Well, at least in my eyes it is, but at the same time it is also the month that surprises a lot of people. Some things are amazing and others can actually make you question if you picked the right time to come at all. My name is Jan, I've been living in Iceland for over 10 years now, and in this video we'll go over everything that you need to know about visiting Iceland in September, plus a bunch of tips that can in some cases completely transform your trip. So let's start with daylight hours, because in Iceland that's actually one of the biggest factors that changes every single month and it really affects how you experience the country. At the beginning of September the days are still pretty long. On September 1st the sun rises around 6 in the morning and sets close to 9 o'clock in the evening. That gives you about 15 hours of daylight, which is plenty of time for exploring, driving or squeezing in multiple activities in one day. On September 30th, the sun doesn't rise until about 7:30 in the morning and it sets around 7 o'clock in the evening. That means you only get about 11.5 hours of daylight, so roughly 3.5 fewer hours compared to the start of the month. But overall you basically get a really nice balance in September. You see, the thing is that in midsummer Iceland has endless daylight, which is an amazing experience in itself, but it doesn't give you the dark skies. And in winter the days are very short, which limits how much you can see and do in one day. September sits right in the middle, you still have a long enough days to explore a lot, but you also finally get proper nights, which opens up the chance to finally see northern lights. And September is actually the first real month of the season when you can start to see the northern lights in Iceland. Now, just to be clear, seeing them is never guaranteed. You basically need three things to line up: solar activity, clear skies and darkness. The darkness part is finally here in September, but the weather can be unpredictable and the cloud cover is the biggest reason why people usually miss them. So all in all, it is really a lot about luck. Some people even catch them right in Reykjavik straight from their balcony. Others drive just 20 minutes out of city and suddenly the sky comes alive, and some people don't see them at all. But personally what I always do is that I follow these 3 steps. Open the aurora forecast on the website weather.is. If it looks like solar activity is good and there are no clouds in my area, then it's a go. And number 3, wait for it to get dark and drive somewhere with no light pollution. And one bonus tip, if you are staying for example somewhere near the mountain or something, that can sometimes block like half of the sky, and so if you really want the best view, try to find an open field or an elevated spot. Now regarding the Northern Light tours, and that is something that I get asked a lot. And in my opinion, unless you are booking a small private group or a photo tour or something, I honestly think that they only make sense if you don't have your own car. Because the thing is that most of the Northern Lights tours, from what I understand at least, is they just drive you to a parking lot right outside of the town, which is definitely something that you can do easily by yourself. One quick warning though, and I know that this might sound obvious, but please don't stop in the middle of the road with your lights off just to watch Northern Lights. Yes, sadly that's one of the crazy things that tourists sometimes do here, and you can imagine how extremely dangerous this can be. But just keep in mind that whether you see them or not really comes down to luck. And that brings us to another big factor in September, the weather. The weather in September is where most people get caught off guard, and I mean it is still considered the tail end of the summer here, but trust me, Iceland doesn't really play by the normal rules of seasons here. On average, temperatures are between 5 and 10 degrees Celsius, and that might sound mild, but what really matters here isn't the numbers on thermometer, it's the wind, rain and how quickly things can change here. I've had September days that were calm, sunny and perfect for hiking even in just a t-shirt. And I've also experienced days where the storm rolled in and the wind was strong enough to nearly knock me over and the rain was basically coming sideways. Sometimes something like that can happen within just a couple of hours. Snow in September is more rare, but it is not impossible, especially later in the month in the highlands or at higher elevations. And because of that mix of conditions, you really can't plan around, perfect weather in Iceland. You just plan to be ready for anything. But the positive side is that this September also brings some beautiful changes. The moss and grass start to shift into autumn colors. The air feels fresh and crisp, and when the sun does come out, it makes the scenery look extra dramatic. You can even find wild blueberries and mushrooms, which on a sunny day is a great excuse to slow down and collect some tasty ingredients for your meals. And since the weather impacts not only your comfort but also how safe it is to travel around, the next thing we need to talk about is the roads. Road conditions in September are usually pretty good compared to winter, but it is still not something to take lightly. The ring road and other main roads are generally open, but the highlands, which is the interior part of the island, that's a different story. many of those F-roads close sometimes in September. When exactly just depends on the weather and the first snow, but as a general rule of thumb, mid-September is when Highland roads basically start closing, some sooner, some later. And even on the main roads, weather can make driving tricky. A lot of visitors underestimate how strong Icelandic wind can get, and it's not unusual for car doors to get damaged if you open them carelessly in a gust. And if you are on a gravel or mountain roads, then that combination of rain, wind, and a loose surface can be a real challenge, especially if you don't have much driving experience. Now, another thing to watch out for is a jet lag. As you can imagine, a lot of people arrive in the morning right after the overnight flight and basically immediately start driving hours across the country. Now, combine that with unfamiliar roads, unpredictable weather, and sometimes sheep wandering around, and sometimes it honestly becomes one of the riskiest parts of the trip. My advice, basically just don't overschedule your first day, just stick to something shorter, stay near Reykjavik or Keflavik, and give yourself some time to adjust before doing longer drives. And always use those official websites, road.is for road conditions, then weather.is for the weather forecast, and safetravel.is for travel alerts. These are updated daily and can literally save you from making a dangerous mistake. And now to answer the question whether to rent a 4x4 or if a two-wheel drive is enough. In September, you can still follow my general advice for summer driving. If your route includes the highland areas or areas with a lot of gravel roads, then 4x4 is definitely a must. But if you are sticking to paved roads for like 90% of your trip, then two-wheel drive should be just fine. And I say should because, like I mentioned earlier, there is always a chance of snow in September, especially towards the end of the month. And so if you have a more flexible budget, then I would definitely recommend going with a 4x4 car, even just for a peace of mind. And in the description of this video, you will actually find some discounts for trusted local rental companies, so make sure to check that out. So basically, yes, September driving is way easier than, for example, in winter, but it is still Iceland, and so you definitely need to respect the conditions. And that brings us to the next big topic, how to actually plan your trip around this month. Planning an itinerary for September is a little different than planning for the summer or winter months, because this is really a transition period. At the start of September, you still have long days, good road access, and the highlands are usually open. And that means that you can still fit in longer drives, big hikes, or even go to the areas like Landmana Loigar or Askja if you are prepared. By the end of September though, things start to change and the days are noticeably shorter, highland roads are often closed, and the weather can make certain areas less reliable. But the flip side is that you now have a much better chance of seeing the northern lights, and the tourist crowds are way smaller compared to months like July or August. So basically the way that I would look at this is this. Early September still feels like a summer and you can plan more ambitious itineraries, cover more distance per day, and explore more remote places like highlands. Late September feels more like autumn. It is better to slow down a little and focus on shorter drives and give yourself some flexibility in case the weather changes your plans. Another nice perk is that flights, rental cars, and accommodations tend to be a little cheaper compared to summer peak. Not by a huge amount, but enough to make the difference, especially if you are traveling as a family or group. And one thing that I recommend, no matter when in September you come, is to build flexibility into your itinerary. Do not plan every day down to the minute, leave some buffer time, because if you get hit with a storm or something, you will need to shift things around. And I can absolutely guarantee that things will take longer and there'll be more unplanned stops than you expect. And speaking of being prepared, let's now talk about what to actually pack for September in Iceland. So packing for Iceland in September is one of those things that can really make or break your trip. It is something that I see people get wrong all the time, bringing things like jeans, sweatpants, or cotton hoodies. And sure, you can bring those definitely, but what you actually need are layers that are waterproof and that will keep you warm. And so here's what I recommend. A good base layer that keeps you warm and dries quickly, a mid layer like a down jacket or a wool sweater, and on top a waterproof and windproof shell or an insulated waterproof parka. Then waterproof hiking boots with a good grip, and a wool hat, waterproof gloves, and a scarf or buff for wind protection. Then pack a swimsuit and a quick dry towel because yes, you will definitely end up in hot springs and lagoons. And number 7, don't forget a headlamp because, by late September, the nights are long enough that you'll actually need it for hikes or for just walking around after dark, when you go aurora hunting. And I have actually put together a full Iceland packing list that goes into way more detail. So if you want to see exactly what I recommend bringing, then you'll find the link in the description below. But the main thing to remember is that the weather here changes constantly. If you are dressed right, you'll be comfortable and enjoy it. And if you are dressed wrong, then you will just end up wet, cold and miserable. And now to wrap everything up, let's just go over some of the things that travelers online said about visiting Iceland in September. And I've actually gone through a bunch of online forums and blogs and all kinds of reviews online just to see what people usually hated, loved, or what surprised them. The first thing on the list, we have sudden storms with really strong winds and heavy rain. And so like I mentioned, always keep an eye on the weather forecast and weather warnings. Roads or campsites closing earlier than expected, especially in the highlands. Again, weather forecast and road.is and safetravel.is, those are the websites to follow. Overpacking the wrong clothes, like too many cotton hoodies, and then realizing they weren't practical here at all. And that is exactly what I cover in my packing list, so check it out later. Popular spots like the Golden Circle still feeling crowded, even though it's technically shoulder season. And that's when my Iceland map comes in handy. You'll get to visit the popular places, but also find those less visited gems. Alright, now things that surprised people. How fast the weather could change, sometimes going from sunny skies to stormy conditions in just minutes. And that's exactly why you will always want to have the waterproof layers ready and not, have them buried at the bottom of your luggage. You can sometimes see the northern lights right in Reykjavik, even from a hotel balcony. And yes, that's true, but they really need to be strong to see them from the city. And so basically really the easiest thing to do is to just drive outside of the city and you'll really higher your chances. It was much colder than expected. Again, layers, layers, layers. No puffins. Yes, that's true, those are unfortunately gone by the end of August. Alright, now things that people loved. The autumn colors starting to show up, with moss and grass turning shades of yellow and red. And that is exactly why September makes one of my favorite months for photography. Having both long enough days to explore and dark enough nights to see the northern lights. It is great, can't agree more. Fewer crowds compared to the summer months. And yes, that's true, and even though it is not always noticeable at these most popular spots and in places like South Iceland, as soon as you venture to different regions, you will definitely notice how much quieter everything is. Cozy moments like sitting in a hot spring on a crisp, cool day. Exactly, and that is the best thing, and honestly, the colder it is, the better hot springs and the outdoor pools are, and you can really look forward to that. So basically, September is really a month of balance, contrast, and surprises. You get long enough days to explore, dark nights for the northern lights, the first hint of autumn colors, and yes, the unpredictable weather that keeps you on your toes. But if you come prepared, then it can be one of the most rewarding times to explore this country. And honestly, in my eyes, it still remains the best time to visit Iceland. And while this video hopefully gave you a clearer idea of what to expect for your trip in September, this next one will help you avoid common mistakes and experience Iceland more like a local, so I hope to see you there.